but just how bipartisan was Mitt Romney as governor, and which Romney would actually show up at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue if elected, the severe conservative or the non-threatening moderate. Well, with me are two guests who know his record out there in Massachusetts. Shannon O'Brien ran against Romney in the 2002 Massachusetts governor's race, and Scott Hellman co-authored the biography called The Real Romney, rather. The Real Romney. See that in bookstores everywhere. Let me start with Shannon. Thank you for joining us, dear. And here's the question. I hear there's a story, a wonderful little anecdote about the elevator in the State House and Mitt's attitude towards it, which is one of those stories that I always like because it explains human behavior in a way that voting records don't. Explain the elevator and Mitt as governor.
Well, the man of the people, the guy who was so bipartisan, actually for the first time in history that anyone could remember, took an elevator that was previously open to the public and kept it just for himself, his own little private bubble going up and down into the governor's office. So the public couldn't be on it, and no legislators who wanted to buttonhole him to talk to him about legislative priorities could not get on for the 4 years that he served as governor.
Scott, that reminds me so much when the Republicans took over the White House after Carter was president. They took the White House mess where most of the middle and the upper people, the speechwriters, got to eat, and they divided it into the executive mess for people like Ed Meese and Jim Baker, separating them so gingerly from the masses of other people. What is this? Is this a Republican cultural thing? You have to have segregated eating facilities for the very elite?
I think this
elevator facilities.
I can't speak to the broader dynamic, but I mean it's certainly reflective of Romney, who is a control freak. He loves to have people in the places where he wants them. I mean, even more than that, when you were in the State House and you had an event with him, I mean, there were pieces of tape on the floor with your name. That's where you were supposed to stand. It was all very tightly controlled, and I think that is very much reflective of the Mitt Romney that I know.
Well, the moderate Mitt showed up in Denver, of course, for the first presidential debate. That was appropriate. Here he was touting his bipartisan bona fides for the national audience that hadn't seen him before or knew about his real background. Let's listen.
I had the great experience, it didn't seem like it at the time, of being elected in a state where my legislature was 87% Democrat. And that meant I figured out from day one I had to get along, and I had to work across the aisle to get anything done. We drove our schools to be #1 in the nation. We cut taxes 19 times. As president, I will sit down on day one, actually the day after I get elected, I'll sit down with leaders, the Democratic leaders, as well as Republican leaders, and continue, as we did in my state. We met every Monday for a couple hours, talked about the issues and the challenges in our state in that case.
Shannon, he's already sat down with Grover Nordquist and signed the dotted line to stick to his fiscal policy. He already sat down with the religious right and got his robes on down there at Regency University. He's already joined that crowd on everything from abortion to same-sex. He's joined the neocon crowds with Dan Cena and the rest of those guys. He says he's going to sit down as if he's some virgin politically when he's cut all these deals ahead of time. Can you believe he's going to be Mr. Bipartisan after being such a severe conservative all these months and getting the nomination?
No, and on the campaign trail, he said so many conflicting things. You really can't look at his words, but what you can look at is how he governed. I think he probably set a record. He vetoed 800 either pieces of legislation or line item vetoes, twice what his Republican predecessor, Bill Weld, did. Bill Weld, who actually let people on that elevator going up and down while he was governor for 8 years, or almost 8 years. 800 vetoes. And these were not just small things. These are things like vetoing the minimum wage, vetoing access to contraceptive rights. But sometimes they were petty and partisan. Vetoing a special bill that would have helped a disabled cop. Vetoing money that would have paid for kosher meals for elderly people in nursing homes. 800 vetoes, and I think something like 750 vetoes were overridden by the Democratic legislature. So that doesn't sound like a guy who's playing ball with people on the other side of the team.